Hey, John, what's going on?
Man, it's so good to see you again, Roosevelt. It's been a while, but I'm really looking forward to this podcast today because we're going to talk about the recent presentation to the Caddo Shreveport Metropolitan Planning Commission on what we've learned basically in Allendale Strong, lo these many years of study. I know I've been at it since 2015, so we had a chance to make a presentation. Kim and Dorothy did a great job, and then they, our worthy opponents, our loyal loyal members of the Shreveport community that were there responded angrily. So
Yeah,
let's
yeah, we're gonna get into that with one of the people that gave the presentation, Mr. Kim Mitchell. Thank you for coming out to talk about this.
Glad to be here, Roosevelt. It's always a pleasure to be with you and John.
I mean, we always love to have you here, being one of the people that helped get this fight started, and you know, you and Dorothy and Allendale Strong and the people of Allendale Strong have been at it for almost over a decade now. And, finally, you guys have collected so much data, you've made so many friends, and you've had so many people come in and give you information. You've learned so much stuff. And now you want to go and present it to Caddo MPC. And tell us about that. Tell us about this MPC presentation that you and Dorothy came up with.
Well, I have to. We've tried for 11 years to have public conversation about what we've learned as a community of learners and taking action on what we learned. And we haven't had that opportunity. We've tried through NLCOG, and so the fact that we have given them our research, we've said, we've learned that your methods are outdated, your technical approaches are outdated. It's time to update them. Can we take this to a larger conversation? And just we got nothing. And so that response has led us to, I don't know if we're up to 8 or 9 complaints. I guess you'd call it a complaint type letter to everybody that we could think of that maybe have some role, including the President of the United States. And we finally got a federal highway civil rights investigation out of all that. But our goal has been, we need to expand the public conversation because there's some deep flaws in the current transportation planning system, and we want to help citizens take a role in that change. And so Alan Clark, the MPC director, I'm going to say at this point, he was courageous enough to create that opportunity for us to present to his planning commission. And it was a wonderful exercise of our community in putting that presentation together. And I felt very privileged to be able to be a presenter with Dorothy and present more of the technical issues because of my background as a planner and an architect. So it was just great. And what we shared was, we first of all shared about who we are. Dorothy did that we're a learning and doing community. That's what Allendale Strong started as in 2012. So it's been, 11 years that we've been doing this, meeting on a monthly basis, working between times, and we've grown quite a network of people, and it's grown way beyond Allendale neighborhood. And it includes people from across Shreveport. We've been, John's efforts on social media, I just always marvel I think John gets a little frustrated with me that I don't have his skills sometimes, but it's just amazing to have 5,000 followers and to look back on our learning and be thankful for the people that have taken an interest in us nationally, and then our role in growing a statewide coalition of cities that are working to change transportation planning practices and policies, and then even seeing our Allendale group play a foundational role in forming a network of freeway fighters across the country. And it's at that point that you realize there's a big change going on in our country. And any big change that our country has taken on has not been easy. And I would even, for our citizens and friends who are at this point, I'd say stuck in their belief in urban freeways, I would remind them that when the decision was made to run freeways through cities, the decision was probably made in the 50s, and then it started being implemented in the 60s. That had never been done before. That was a huge change. And with what we've learned and shared with the Planning Commission, it was the beginning of disconnecting land use from transportation planning. And so we shared the history of that. And we also shared the history that we've learned about how harmful that has been. One thing about our national network is you start to realize just how significant the harm has been, particularly to African American communities. And so we shared a little bit of that history. And then, we've had some of the learning comes from early on. The former mayor of Milwaukee, John Norquist, took an interest in us. He actually wrote an editorial letter to the Shreveport Times, and gave us advice, because as a mayor in Milwaukee, he had led the effort to tear down a freeway, and he had led another effort to block the expansion of another freeway. And in his legacy, Milwaukee is still fighting on tearing down another one and blocking some more transportation efforts. So great inspiration, because he could tell us that the city came back to life when they tore that down and started using that land for bringing back the urban fabric. And we learned along the way from New Orleans too, a land use attorney there, very famous land use attorney in New Orleans, Bill Bora, and he led a historic effort to stop the freeway industrial complex harm in Louisiana from building what was called the Vucare Expressway. And for all of us who have a soft place for the charms of New Orleans, imagine, had that been done, it would have been built through Jackson Square. I'm not even sure that the cathedral would be in a shape worthy of tourism, and the French Quarter would probably be gone. Yeah. And so coming out of that 15-year fight, Bill Bora really educated us this is a long fight that you're entering into, or a long initiative into a transportation system that is designed to wear out any opposition. And here we are 11 years into trying to block or the expansion or addition of a unneeded freeway connector, and trying to prevent that harm that it's going to do. And our journey continued in connecting with Chuck Marone and Strong Towns, who Chuck came along and was so taken when he and just to share with everyone his story, he came to Shreveport at the invitation of a spin out of Allendale Strong that's now known as Reform Shreveport. And so when he came, one of the founder, Tim Wright, arranged for him to meet with our Allendale Strong group in the Friendship House in Allendale. Chuck was staying downtown. Chuck loves to experience the urban fabric, so he walked from downtown out to the Friendship House. And he described how angry he got as he walked through Ledbetter Heights and saw some PLAPA project type federal investment and all the vacant land. And the more he walked toward us, the angrier he got, until he turned the corner on Allen and walked up the street. And he describes feeling differently. He had entered into this special part of Allendale we call the Friendship House area. And he said people were friendly. They waved, they smiled. He passed by a community garden. He saw all these new homes. And then he got to the Friendship House and he met with us, where he said he was just in disbelief that any city would still be trying to build an urban freeway. And he took that and developed this special bond with our Allendale Strong group that he went home and enlisted his network of writers and communicators and urbanists. And in a week, they wrote 21 articles about Allendale Strong and the ridiculousness of the proposed freeway. And he did something that opened our eyes. He took the NLCOG Economic Justification Report and in 3 articles just totally discredited it. And then a follow-up podcast said he was hesitant to say this at first, but now he believes it constitutes public fraud, the propaganda that's in there. And he went further and included it in his last book called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. And then chapter 8 wrote about that. And so we shared that those learnings with the Planning Commission. And in addition to that, we ended up hiring a consultant, Norm Marshall, who really took us to another level of understanding the technical problems with NLCOG's outdated transportation modeling and economic justification. And he opened our eyes to a new fact, or new reality, which is the transportation plan, our planning process and engineering technology is all generated from aspirational values, which helped us begin to see, the transportation plan aspirational values don't line up with the city's master plan aspirational values. And just one of them, there are about 7 of them that we identified and developed a card game for this presentation to enlist the Planning Commission and the audience in making a choice between, do you want to grow your future on transportation values or on citizen values of the master plan? One of those values that's maybe easy to understand is the transportation values or aspirational values are to increase vehicle miles traveled, to intentionally put citizens in a way that they have to spend more time in a car trying to drive faster, farther. The city's master plan has very embedded in its values to reduce vehicle miles traveled, to increase our walkability and public transit and those kind of things that make for a higher quality wealth generating place. And so the master plan is about growing in to all of our vacant, distressed neighborhoods and renewing them. The transportation plan is about growing our infrastructure outward. And as we learned from Urban 3, we've grown it outward through the urban freeways in a way that we can't afford it. And we're literally collapsing in our infrastructure maintenance. We can't afford what we built. And so we now can use what we've learned to explain how we got there. And so we went through all of that, and we were able to explain that what our leaders are relying on is nothing more than propaganda to make decisions. And they keep making these decisions believing in freeways are our future, and it explains, well, how in the world could we have a $30 billion deficit in maintenance and big mega projects like this $49 billion proposed project? And what explains it is this belief in the propaganda that is being generated by NLCOG and their methods, and which get back to the aspirational values. And the problem, we also have learned this: people are frustrated that we cannot implement the master plan. And they've reached a point of frustration where they're starting to point fingers as though there were, master plan was flawed in its whole methodology. But that's not the real issue. Is the master plan has no funding, but the transportation plan does. Even though it's deficit spending, that's the reason. And so the master plan or the transportation plan gets funded in a way that we're accelerating outward growth while our population is declining. We shared with them something very important, I think, which is we learned from the EPA environmental justice folks, you've got to understand disproportionate impact on these neighborhoods that are threatened or have been divided by freeways. That means you have to expand your time horizon in order to understand the harm. And so we looked that in 1950, Shreveport was 127,000 people and 24 square miles. That's a density of about 5,400 people per square mile. And if you look at that point in time, we were a well-maintained city. We had a privately run trolley system, and transportation was affordable. Public transportation was affordable and worked. And so we grew well, and after 1950 and in the 1960s, we built I-20 through the city. And we had, in the mid-50s, decided that we were going to cut the city into quadrants. And we had even found quotes from the first or the master planner of our city in 1956, and Arch Winter. And Arch Winter, in an interview in 1980, acknowledged that he had no say-so as the city's master planner in the freeways that they were given. He had to accept it. And so Arch's master plan was really the beginning of disconnecting transportation planning from land use planning and accelerated outward growth. We embraced that. And why wouldn't we? The federal government was paying 90% of the cost. They don't do that anymore. You're doing good if they pay 40% of the cost of a project like the proposed 3.5 miles of 49 that they want to build, which will be $1 billion. And where's the money coming from? So we grew along this freeway facilitated what we call induced growth to 1980. Next look. We had now reduced our density to about 2,300 people per square mile. We were 90 square miles rather than our 24 in 1950, and so we were starting to spread out with maximum population of 207,000, I think, at that point, and then we kept growing beyond that point. So to today, we are at 1,700 people per square mile, and we're 110 plus square miles. And our population has declined to 184,000. So we're putting all this before the Planning Commission in a way to say, look at the harmful history, understand how the threat of a freeway is the reason that Allendale went from, as our chamber executive direct pointed out, prior to or in 1950s, Allendale was 30,000 plus people in 3 census tracts. Then we built I-20, and the population dropped about 17,000 or so people in 10 years. And then it continued to decline under the threat of the freeway in this way that we took a wonderful neighborhood. Allendale was a thriving neighborhood in 1950. And then we have, because of the threat of the freeway, put in motion a cycle of decline. It had a redlining effect. Who's going to buy land and invest in land that's in the path of a freeway? What happens then is that population begins to leave, businesses begin to close, more population leaves, a food desert appears, or as someone said, it's really food apartheid, and then schools close in the very neighborhood where we need population to live in our inner city. And so now today, what Tim's graphic showed is we're at 3,400 people in Allendale. And what Allendale Strong represents is a small area of that Allendale neighborhood that was reinvested in a wonderful way to create new homeowners for about 50 people and to create community. And it's a miracle, and it's one we ought to do more of. And Roosevelt, as you've pointed out to us in our homeowner summit, we should be doing more of this, and we should be doing it better, but we can't, because the donors have been convinced not to put any more money into the Fuller Center type houses because of the freeway. And so so we shared all this information to get to a point of saying, Planning Commission, Allendale Strong would like to work with you in 3 collaborations. One being that we'd like to change the aspirational values of the transportation model that's used to justify all the outward growth that they want to do. And we've got a consultant to do it. So just come and learn with us as we see how that influence could change the whole investment strategy of transportation. The second thing we'd like you to do is to work with us to reconnect land use and transportation planning. How can we go into the future with that conflict if we don't do something about it? And we're going to have to learn together and experiment into that. And then the third collaboration is we're interested in strengthening citizen leadership and growing citizens together in more learning doing groups like Allendale Strong. We'd like to work with you to help grow that across the city. So that was our presentation. And I'm sorry it took me so long. You can stop me, but that was really, what we wanted to share is try to bring our citizenry into that. And then the first comment reacting to that was Rose McCullough, who's on the Planning Commission. And I'll mention her by name because she got it. She was positive. She was ready to talk about the collaborations, and we started that conversation. But then it got sidetracked. Someone else that I'm not going to name the name, but he's an influential person. I will say he's part of the committee of 100.
And sits on the MPC, right? So
yeah, he's an MPC.
Conflict of interest.
Yeah, the first reaction was we wanted the conversation with the MPC. It was a public meeting. As I said, the director, Alan Clark, was very courageous and setting up a special meeting for our presentation and discussion about what we presented. And so we started that, but there was some heckling from the audience wanting to get beyond us so that other people in the audience could say what they wanted to say, which wasn't really responding to our proposal. But anyway, the first level was the commission response. And the second person that spoke, as I said, influential person, but he looked at me and said, Kim, I'm offended by your presentation. And I looked at him and say, I really didn't understand that comment because there hadn't been any, it's just sharing what we learned. And he said, you call me a racist and a propagandist. And I'll be honest, I was taken back a bit, but I began to say, well, this is just trying to take the conversation away from where we need to go, which is our collaborations. But
yeah, Kim, let me interject. I was sitting there. I never heard you say anybody in the room was a racist. I did hear you talk about the propaganda that's been used to promote a really bad idea. You didn't call anybody a propagandist, but you called BS on their message. I mean, I have a stronger word for the propaganda, but it was propaganda. And I can talk more about that later, but go ahead. I was shocked too. I went out to my car, got a flak jacket, and came back in because it was starting to get hot in that room.
Well, in reflecting on that, I guess I understand why that conclusion was drawn. If you are processing what we're sharing, you can see yourself as part of it, because we all are a part of creating this problem, including those. I've got a history of being a city planner and architect, and not really understanding as deeply as I do today what we've spent 11. And I'm going to say, John, you and I in particular, and I know Roosevelt studies this. We've made this a commitment to learn about this and try to find ways to help our communities change. But as I processed it, I thought, okay, I shared that the information that our leaders are using is propaganda, as shown by Chuck Marone, and then more recently, one of our freeway fighters out of Houston sent me information on what's called Marchetti's constant, which once adds to the information about disproving something that NLCOG counts as economic justification, which is time savings on driving on the interstate. And the research actually shows there is no time savings from driving on the interstate, that the phenomenon is that if people can use an interstate to get to a destination, that they tend to decide to live farther out, because the reality is they're going to be comfortable driving 15 or 30 minutes, no matter how far they live out. And so the research shows that you just can't claim time savings from infrastructure development or expansion. It's just not real.
Now wasn't that one of the architect on the MPC board? Wasn't that one of his complaints was that building the highway would save him 3 or 4 minutes every getting to his office? And how do you put a price tag on 3 or 4 extra minutes in your office? It's preposterous. So $1 billion to shave 3 minutes a day times 300 days a year that he goes to work, that's not worth it. It's not a good.
Well, I appreciate this guy's processing the way he did, and it was almost as though someone listening to what we said and then self-convicting that they'd been part of it. And, I did respond about my own personal journey to quit the Committee of 100 when it decided to launch $100,000 marketing campaign of misinformation. And the particular misinformation was to promote to the public that the only gap in I-49 from Lafayette or New Orleans to Winnipeg, Canada, was 3.5 miles through the center of the city of Shreveport.
As if we were holding up progress for the whole nation. And they even did it with an ugly graphic where a car drives to Shreveport and falls off of a cliff and can't go any further. Now, how wrong? I'm just going to call it what it was. It was either ignorance. They hadn't looked at a map to see where 49 begins and ends, and where it actually ends is at basically at Kansas City, Missouri. And it ends on a boulevard, which that's all we've ever asked for, is a boulevard instead of a highway. And then it goes no closer to Winnipeg. And of course, it stops in at Texarkana, doesn't go through South Arkansas, and there's no plans for it to go through South Arkansas. So when I go to Texarkana, they didn't build it through Texarkana. They built a loop around Texarkana, and there it ends. So I always joke that we already have a nonstop trip from Texarkana to Natchitoches. If you want to go down and get meat pies, you can get out of your car, get them, and get back in without stopping because of the loop. So let's spend the money to repair the crumbling loop, which is their nonstop connection from Arkansas to Natchitoches.
Well, we even made the case, I guess that response did allow some feedback, and so that person was recognizing. It gave me a chance to talk about this. In fact, there's a 180-mile gap in Arkansas. There's the gap between Lafayette and New Orleans. We had a recent estimate. It's something like between 16 and $20 billion that has to be invested for those gaps. And then Shreveport is here, that's got a loop that connects it and is wanting a redundant connection, which is what 3.5 miles is for $1 billion. It's kind of like that. That's greedy,
In a national economy that is in debt, and the debt's rising, but they don't seem concerned a bit about it. So, are they really conservative about it? Just they love big government spending projects. Is what's odd about them.
And I could understand why this person would think that this is placing them as a propagandist when they're doing something like that. But I didn't call them that. That's once again, that's more like raising your hand to say I am one. And then the racist,
a hit dog holler.
Yeah. And then the racist part was we shared that that freeways were wiping out not just the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but Black Wall Streets across this country, including our own Black Wall Street, which was Texas Avenue. And the I-20 and continued threats of I-49 have played a primary role in the loss of those assets for the African-American community.
Black Wall Street in New Orleans was wiped out by an interstate. We talked about that on the last pod. Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's we go back and we look at it. It was intentional in what they were doing, right? It was very intentional in everything that they did in their thought process of taking out a slum. They used an interstate, right? It was like, okay, we want to take out this neighborhood. Instead of us going in and trying to improve the neighborhood, we're just going to wipe it off the map with this interstate. It's almost like using using a rocket launcher to kill to try to take out a spider web, right? So that's what they did. And, John brought this up in the last podcast. Instead of just destroying that neighborhood, they slowly eroded the rest of the neighborhood around it. That
Yeah.
Right. And killed downtown retail. African Americans were welcome to shop inside the white-owned retail stores in downtown Shreveport on Saturdays. That you could have called that African American Day back in the 50s. And when they started I-20 through Shreveport in 1959, it slowly built a giant wall to get all of the walk-up traffic that could walk into downtown and shop on Saturdays. The businessmen lost their Saturdays, and so they had to go to where the customers were and moved out of downtown. Now has 50% occupancy rate. It's a hell of a disaster to build I-20 through Shreveport. But it didn't say. And one other interesting note, Danielle was telling us on the last podcast, she's been to the archives to see all of the information that the archivist out there, Dr. Laura McLemore, has collected on the builds of I-20 through Shreveport. Mm-hmm. And there's celebratory writing in a newspaper about the removal of slums. It was a slum removal process, according to people alive and old enough to write in those days. I was alive, but I had no idea what was going on until I've started learning about it.
Yeah. Well, that there's another person in our learning community is the archivist at LSUS, Laura McLemore. And, she's there to, she's put together a history of Allendale and done interviews, and now helping us see some of the history of the interstate system. But I read
I got to go see that. I just found out about that, and boy, I'm excited to get out there and read those testimonies about the improvement they made by wiping out people's homes and neighborhoods.
Yeah, and they were celebrating things like how much concrete and steel went into it. It's an interesting read, John, and there's very little about the harm of it. Just refers to cleaning up blight, and now what we know, and back to the learning again, is that this was occurring. The decisions were made to run through Black neighborhoods because they couldn't really resist, or that there was this misunderstanding of what really blight is. And so at a time we were beginning to deal with civil rights issues, we wiped out the economy of African American communities across this country. And there's some recent work of Robert Pudman, who revealed research that showed that in the 1950s and right up to 1960, African Americans across this country had made more progress toward income equality than at any other time in the history of our country. And then we hit the 60s, and that began to decline. Well, there's a lot of things that could go into that, but it makes sense to me that if we wiped out all these economies in the 60s, that
what a coincidence. Yeah.
And you gotta, there was oppression, there was a lot of disadvantage, there was redlining going on, but somehow the African American communities in cities across this country had moved the needle of income equality together, to a high. And then we began to tear it apart with freeways. And I don't know that we made that connection until a lot of the recent research that has really revealed that, really a strange set of circumstances in our history to have an awakening to civil rights and a destruction of an economy. that may have been some of the offense that they took was, that reality. But
Well, I've discussed this before with some of them. They don't see it as racist. They see it as good business practices to buy up the cheapest land and build the highway through the cheap land and save money for the government.
Yeah, I mean, but you look at how that cheap land was built, right? How was that cheap land? Why was it cheap? Number one, why was this land cheap? I'll look back at my uncle that built a home in Allendale, right?
Yeah,
But could not get any loans to fix up his house.
yeah,
that's still
And you
going.
look at
That still goes on today. People can't get loans to fix their house up because there's a highway threat.
yeah.
There was two redlining episodes. What your uncle experienced was the first redlining that was done by the finance industry in black neighborhoods. But when now are referring to it as the urban land curse, which is when a decision was made to for a path or general path for freeways, it had a different redlining effect. And it was perhaps a more powerful redlining effect in terms of the decline of the physical nature of the inner city neighborhoods, or as someone told us this morning, refer to them as core neighborhoods.
Yeah,
which I kind of like that term.
Yeah,
so it's really strange, but it's like, how can we solve these problems if we can't see the problems that we're trying to solve? And other comments that were a little disturbing, actually, the mayor was also offended. And the message to us was that we're offended by what you've learned, because we weren't trying to judge anybody in the room. That was not. It was more, let's embrace the reality of it so we can move in a positive direction, so that we can. I mean, the whole idea that we're going to try to reinvest our core neighborhoods when we are not recognizing the conflict between transportation planning and the city's master plan. Talk about spinning your wheels.
Well, I was sitting there, and I know Mayor Arsenault, call him Tom when we're not in front of a group of people. I've known him for years, and sat next to him at a Strong Towns Talk in Shreveport one time, had great conversations. I was shocked because he's a Republican mayor in a mainly Democratic voters city, and how he could get up and express his hurt when what we were saying was, this hurts. These are people who moved to Shreveport in distress, started building homes in Allendale through a program so that they'd have a home. They were homeless. Their homes had been wiped out in New Orleans in 2005. And you don't think they're hurt feelings, And so I didn't think we were there to hurt feelings. We were there to bring everybody on the MPC up to speed on what we've been learning, in my case, for 8 or 9 years now. And in others, Dorothy Wiley founded Allendale Strong 4 years before I got there, as I recall. So I guess the truth hurts. Hearing people speak truth to power is hard for the powerful to understand. But Mayor Tom Arsenault missed a great opportunity to be a unifier and to pull these two different disparate groups, very disparate, together. He just totally blew it, and he's lost my vote. Next time, because if his feelings are getting in the way of his brain, then I don't need him as my mayor.
I mean, I look at it as the same conversation that happens when you bring up past problems in history. you know, I want to bring up the reaction to CRT, critical race theory.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same vein, to where when I bring up what happened in the past, and I say that it's still happening today with the policies that are going through, then the person that's sitting in that chair, they're like, wait, you're calling me a racist. And we're like, no, what we're saying is, if you're following the same path of the policies from the past and you're bringing those same policies to the future, then that's the mistake. Not that we're calling you a racist. It's just that now, if I give you better information on how these things are affecting the people today, right? If I give you
Right.
new information to say, hey, this is how it's affecting us today, these policies from the past, can you cut them off and say, all right, guess what? We're not doing that anymore. That's over with. I'm not calling you a racist. I'm just saying that those policies that you're bringing forward were racist. And we have evidence that they were racist.
Right. These are people that haven't picked up the 1619 Project book and opened it up. I have. I've started that book. And if you haven't read it yet, it's right. It should be on the top of your reading list, Roosevelt. It's right up your alley. And it starts with the slave ship that rolled into the harbor before the Mayflower and got the first 40 people from Africa enslaved, and follows the whole history of the thing. But without getting too far away from that, nobody called anybody a racist. But we did point out there's civil rights violations all through this, that there's now civil rights laws to correct, which so let's go with a more sensible solution than one that's going to get bogged down with the law.
And we're really, we're really not. I mean, I know all the national level dealing with, I call it big category information. We're rolling up our sleeves and digging into the issues that have caused harm, and we're exploring positive ways to change what we're doing. And we can't really make progress by accusing people of anything, which is back to the unfortunate nature of the way that the information was received. But I also, in addition to the message of we're offended by what you're learning, then the pivot to start talking about other cities and in a way that it is the freeways that make cities great. And which there was a reference to Austin being great, and Houston and Dallas. And, what we didn't get a chance to in a response is that those cities are part of our freeway fighters network. And that let's expand our time horizon. I know most of the people that were in the room have only grown up in a world with urban freeways. But Dallas was a great city before it ever had a freeway. And the reality is that Dallas has managed to thrive in spite of freeways. Freeways are putting an extreme stress on that city. And once again, our continued learning, what we learned is that over a 10-year period, Dallas replaced leadership in its city government, political leadership, because there was a realization that freeways are creating a mess out of Dallas, and that the highway industrial complex political leaders of 10 years ago wanted to build what's called the Trinity River Expressway, maybe 10 billion or so a new freeway. Well, 10 years of perseverance on citizens' part, and they replaced all those leaders and killed recently the Trinity River Freeway. And then we know they're trying to tear down IH 345, another elevated freeway that separates downtown Dallas from Deep Ellum. But they're being blocked by the DOT. And then we've got a group in Austin, and just the conversation about how wonderful Austin is because of its growth and you know, it used to be keep Austin weird. Now it's something else. Well, we are attached to a network of folks in Austin who are trying to their best to fight the freeway expansion of I-35 in downtown Austin, where TxDOT wants to expand it to 24 lanes, which
That's 35. I'm becoming closer and closer. I follow them on.
Yeah.
Or they posted today, Kim, expanding lanes to your inner city freeways, like getting another credit card and thinking that'll lead to financial freedom. That they're really clever people and they're committed, and I admire.
Well, you know, the Austin bunch follows us and we follow them, and we collaborate and talk, and have actually been in a special meeting with Pete Buttigieg's assistant in Oklahoma City. And, you know, it's just wonderful. But they also use the same consultant we do, Norm.
Mm-hmm.
And Norm's analysis showed that the current traffic levels of which are, you know, if you compare that to Shreveport's, they're amazingly off the chart. But 80% of all the travelers on I-35 through downtown Austin are trips of less than 2 miles. And Norm said those folks would be better off to take street grid, but because of our psychology, if we think we can save time using the interstate, we do. And enough of us think that, we get on, we create congestion. And so they make quite a strong case for tearing down I-35 through Austin and putting back the original boulevard that was there, which would compel that 20% of through traffic to use the loop that is underutilized in Austin, where you can go, I think you can go as fast as you want to drive. I don't think there is. And so,
yeah, I mean, you look at Dallas, you look at Austin, look at Houston. None of those cities are. All right, let's look at Dallas. Who stays in Dallas? Like the actual city of Dallas, right? It's a very small number because the majority of the people stay in the suburbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shreveport's looking at Dallas, seeing how they grow, but you know, instead of Shreveport, are you looking out for Shreveport, or are you looking out for the suburbs of Shreveport? Because that's who's going to grow, not Shreveport. You know, if you try to copy what Dallas is doing as an interstate grid, you know, Bossier, Caddo, and Webster is gonna grow, not Shreveport. Shreveport is gonna slowly die like it is now.
Yeah,
and probably faster.
Like horrible. Yeah, we're dying. So factoid. When I first got involved, I thought everybody was pointing towards Dallas because they have 2 highways. I call it the Magic X. And so I Googled what cities are along I-20 that have that Magic X, a junction between 2 federal interstates. And then I looked at the populations of all of them, and the majority of them, 6 of them, were smaller than Shreveport. And Jackson's the first one that comes to mind along I-20 that has another interstate, but they're smaller than Shreveport. The majority of the 11 cities are smaller than us. So it does kind of cause you to wonder what's magic about having a junction with a second interstate. Doesn't appear to be working in Jackson.
Or Birmingham.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It goes back to, you know, and John, I think you were credited with this quote, but that what we're stuck, or where we're stuck, is we've got our leaders thinking or working to create this 1970s city that was envisioned in 1950. They're stuck in those mindsets. That's where NLCOG's methods and engineering practices are stuck. And it's just, you know, we need to update. and the power dynamics are such that DOTs they can do whatever they want to do. The federal government gave them authority where they go through a very superficial public process of engaging and listening to the citizens, but
They're
they have
required by
no,
law to do that, and
yeah,
that's about how much energy they
yeah.
put into it.
But they don't have to go along with the will of the people in a community.
No.
They get to decide. All they have to do is listen to the will of the people, but then they're back to their mindset of our job is to fuel the economy by getting people to drive more. And the more they drive, the more cars they have. That's what we're aiming to do.
Yeah,
And
they're required to have a public listening period and forward those results. So they listen formally and take note of a vote, basically. The public, so whoever gets the most turnout will be heard first in DC, but they don't pay any attention to that. Then they're also required to make their suggestion for what's the best route for the highway through Shreveport, and that could be completely different than what the public suggests. So it's just a suggestion. But yeah, what a mess this whole process. I don't understand why they don't go through and do the SHPO process first, where they look at the history and at the environmental impacts before they start plotting routes. I think it's because you can generate more fees for your friends in the engineering industry by looking at the route first and then asking SHPO what's the historical issues with the route, which canceled 3 of our routes.
yeah, well, John, I've come to realize that it's back to the mindset that's where all of our what we're trying to accomplish comes from. And their mindset is we're identifying historic resources so that we can mitigate them. They have really no intent toward preservation. To them, that historic and cultural resources report is just trying to identify what they have to mitigate so they can begin to figure out how to do away with those assets in a way that the public feels good about it. And
right.
So what you say is the perfect thing. Yes, we should be understanding our resources, valuing them, focused on how we're going to preserve them. But the transportation planning system works in a different way. And, another hard thing of change and the big change we're talking about is we have to think differently. And that's another part of our presentation that says, let's do that. I mean, we can't keep thinking that we're going to solve problems, continuing to do the same thing and using the same thinking process to try to solve problems that we're not even seeing, which is seems to be where we're stuck. If we're going to promote the transportation plan and its values of outward growth, and then we're going to engage citizens in how we reinvest all the declining inner city or core neighborhoods, that just doesn't work. It's like we're working against ourselves.
The mayor formed a blight abatement committee to figure out how to undo the blight created by the interstates that he loves to build. After that meeting, I went home, took off my flak jacket. It was very painful being in that room, but I think that was pain that we all needed. We'd been kind of protecting ourselves from the ugliness, like an infected wound that needs to be lanced. And as I thought about it, so I go on social media, and a curious guy, always curious, I looked up what the others were saying, and the opposition was taking screenshots of our Facebook page and lambasting us. They were making fun of us. showed a picture of a bunch of us standing with Chuck Maroon on the steps of a house in Allendale, and they said only two of the residents showed up to the meeting, but they're so out of touch they don't realize because the meetings here are held in the middle of the afternoon, and working poor people can't take off work for a couple hours to go downtown and express their opinion to their government. It's they're so out of touch, and I want to be as respectful as I can be, that I blocked some of them because they were really being childish with our photographs and our and criticizing us, and it was more pain they're spreading. They're not interested in unifying; they're interested in dividing us.
Well, that I still view all those folks as good people, and I think they may have good intentions. As my friend Murray Lloyd says, we want to, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
The highway to hell. But what we want to do is change good intentions into intentional good. And I think that's really been our effort with Allendale Strong, is that that's what we're doing. We're learning into an extremely complex challenge. And, it's a little, I also feel like, John, we are making progress with our citizenry, just the feedback that I get on occasion. But I get a sense, because of the reaction that we encountered to sharing what we've learned, I think citizens of Shreveport are fearful to speak what they believe.
Yeah, some of the richest, most powerful, economically powerful people in Shreveport will try to cancel you. A cancel culture started with the C-100. I would have been afraid to speak out when I had a local job. It's when I began to work for national clients that I felt comfortable speaking out, because I know what they do. But to try to pivot to a more positive thing, so I go to the NLCOG monthly meeting just Friday before we recorded this podcast, and you get the public is listened to for 3 minutes. I don't think they take away much from it. But since the Committee of 100 became interested in showing up to the meetings and finding out why their highway hasn't been built, because they're really mad about the highway hadn't already been built. But I told them in one meeting, if you don't come to the meetings, you don't know about the legal processes, the legal hurdles that have to be accomplished by the NLCOG. The time it takes is the time it takes to do all that. And so I took my 3 minutes to read the archival letter from the FHWA 25 years ago, responding to then Senator John Breaux, U.S. Senator Breaux, about his information he had sent from the Patsman Civic Club, which I don't believe exists here anymore. And there are about 4 salient paragraphs I wanted to read, not only to NLCOG, because they can't find that letter. I've asked them for it, but we found it, and I wanted to read them the paragraphs that dispel the myth that a very old sweet nun who was active in Allendale stopped it. Sister Margaret, let her rest in peace. She didn't stop it. It was the 1966 Transportation Act and the 1969 NEPA process, which I think should go before they start to pick a route. Where would NEPA allow us to invest that money and study? So I read them.
John, for our audience, NEPA is National Environmental Policy Act.
Right. And so I read them that letter, and their jaws just dropped, because they'd been living in that magical thinking that one Catholic nun who then recanted it on her deathbed, which we heard at that meeting from Commissioner Roy Burrell, talked about Sister Margaret's impact. It was the law, which I've been telling them for years. It's the 1966 Transportation Act and the NEPA laws. And so the four-legged stool that stopped that the decision rested on was the environmental racism. It goes through a Black neighborhood. The environmental issues of going through wetlands, which we drink the water that runs into the lakes and rivers from the wetlands, and also just the redundancy. There's no need in spending $1 billion. I don't know what it would have been in '96, but it's ridiculous to build a highway when you've already got one that you can't afford to keep up. Well, these people's jaws dropped, and they really have usually been pretty mean and disrespectful to me. But I told them, you can find this letter. We found it. You can put it, you can find it on our webpage. You can find it on our social media across the board. And they just seemed silenced, And the other interesting thing was the whole bit about the $100 million that Louisiana got $800 million from the BP oil spill disaster. It was dedicated in 8 parts to different areas of the state. And Senator Beryl Peacock had gotten up less angry and more sort of pleading, please get a record of decision before the Louisiana legislature claws back the $100 million that he had foolishly, I will say I thought it was foolish, but I know more about the state legislature than he does. It was dedicated by the legislature to the Jimmy Davis Bridge repair project. He asked them to rededicate it to I-49 2-3 years ago, which was really not close to a record of decision from DC. Then the search for funding begins. So he dedicated to it. Louisiana legislature has said they're going to claw it back if something isn't done with it towards I-49 by the end of this year. And then NLCOG announced nothing will be done by the end of this year. Look for a record of decision, possibly as early as the fourth quarter of 2024. So there was no joy in Mudville because they're going to lose $100 million in funding, and they were read, the law that stopped them from building it last time.
Well, the tragedy of that is the $100 million would do what Allendale Strong has advocated for since 2012, which is conceptually, our advocacy is separate local and through traffic, and the solution of that is maintain the loop, and then build for through traffic, and for local traffic, build a business boulevard using existing federal highways and a route through Allendale to connect to the interchange at I-20 and I-49. And that could be done for the $100 million, as opposed to, so what if you got $100 million, that's only 10% of what you have to put together. And the federal government doesn't pay 90% anymore, folks.
No, and that would be more than enough to build the boulevard especially for the local part, because the state and the feds, because those are federal roadways, the feds would have to pay part of it too. But you could build the whole thing, I would think, for $100 million and start building business climate along that route.
Which
wait for feds to figure out I-49.
One of the key aspects of NEPA is that NLCOG's required to consider all reasonable alternatives. And we've contended since 2012, the business boulevard is a reasonable alternative. And they've just refused to accept that. They've given us excuses about why they couldn't, none of which are true.
Yeah.
And that hard-headedness is, we're asked, look at it. We believe that if you truly look at it, you're going to see and look at the real economic benefits. The boulevard will win out. And we don't have to wait on the federal government. We got $100 million that we could go ahead and do that work with.
Before we lose it, the next legislative session um, starts March 1st, and the legislature is going to claw it back like they're often want to do, because
John,
it's horrible.
Yeah. John, you and I have found humor in this, which is one of the ways that we find to persevere. And among the humor is former Secretary of Transportation for the state, Sean Wilson, was in town. And to a reporter on the news, he said the business boulevard is a reasonable alternative to the freeway.
Words carefully too. Yeah.
And then when Governor Edwards came up to dedicate the interchange of I-49 north of the city to the loop, he said I-49 through Shreveport is complete.
Yeah.
And of course, both of them have to dance around all of this political power dynamics of Shreveport that wants the freeway. So they both backed off of those. Well, I don't know if they're totally backed off the statements, but they have come out saying, let's build the freeway through the city, just to give these political leaders what they say they want, all except Cedric Glover. But
the 96 letter from FHWA says use the loop. It's already there. It makes so much sense. Why build a swimming pool when you've got a crumbling roof, and you get your insurance money and blow it on a swimming pool because it'd be cool. And I just don't think these folks have availed themselves of all of the reading.
Most of these folks are successful business people, and I find it really hard to understand that they are not thinking practically about this, because if you just say, if you could view it this way, you've got a choice, Shreveport. You can either build I-49 3.5 miles, or you can maintain your loop. You can't afford to do both. Pick one.
Yeah.
And it's so all we have to do is redesignate the loop as I-49, and we have access to federal funds to maintain it. Otherwise, we've got to use state funds like the elusive Jimmy Davis Bridge money.
Yeah, state and county funds, basically. What an awful mess. But I see it as a chance to be really strong with our educational efforts in these last 18 months before we could expect a record of decision out of DC. That's after they do the public surveys. They're finishing up the engineering on Route 3A, the new route they're looking at. Once they do that, then they'll go through the public comments period, record all the comments, and then package it all up and send it off to DC with a recommended preferred alternative from that body. And then it goes to FHWA's legal office, where they tend to sit for a while as the lawyers dig into all the legalities of the preferred alternative. So that's why the head of the NLCOG said we could possibly get a record of decision by the fourth quarter of 2024. So this could go on longer. I expect it probably will, but I hope that we can find it. And I want to close with this on that meeting is I first publicly thanked Guard Waite, who's a member of that group, because he was the one who went on camera and walked back some of the propaganda, we'll call it. It was untruths. He said, yeah, there's a gap in Arkansas. I don't know when that's going to be done. Yeah, there's another gap, and he walked back that lie about it's the last 3.5 miles. It's right here in Shreveport. We're holding up progress, which makes us out to look like really mean people. And we're not. We're educated people on this subject. And I hope that, and I asked him, could we find something we could work on to unify Shreveport? Because this has been the most divisive thing I've seen since they removed the Confederate monument downtown, and we were all up in arms. Literally, people were standing out there with rifles over the
Well, it may be worse, John, because they've not allowed the kind of conversation that we need to have. So back to my thanks to Alan Clark and Bill Robertson, the MPC chair, who is a part of Allendale Strong, for giving us that opportunity to share something publicly that really our leadership that wants the freeway has not allowed to be spoken in a public way. And they did this to the city master plan. There's several of us that asked the experts at Goody Clancy in a public meeting, not in a conversation afterwards, why aren't you weighing in on I-49 inner city? I said that's it's a very complex issue for our city, and if you, as an out-of-town expert coming in to help us with our plan, can't analyze that and evaluate it for us, what's the use of your plan? I mean, it seems that we can't talk about it locally because of all the retribution, but certainly you can. And they said, well, we've taken this position in Shreveport. If there's anything that's controversial, we are not going to deal with it in the master plan because we're afraid that the master plan would not get approved if we did. And so that was the explanation. And I think there's been, you brought that up, and I think somebody on a radio program said you were a liar, and which is just not true.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and one other thing, a note from NLCOG meeting, Alan Clark, whose wife passed away recently, and my heart goes out to Alan. He's actually been heroic for us. Alan Clark is going to be the incoming chair of the NLCOG, and he asked a really great question. He said, I'm charged, and MPC's charged with reevaluating sort of a mid-course correction on our 2030 master plan as we approach the midpoint. And he said, I need a record of decision on where 49 is going to be. Otherwise, how can we address the master plan if we don't know where 49 will eventually be built? And there were blank stares all around. Well, we don't know when we're going to have an answer to that. So the whole thing's just a very tangled mess.
I appreciate his trying to put it on the table, but if that's the approach that the city's going to take, it's still saying the transportation plan is disconnected from the land use plan, and all we're going to do is accept whatever it is, and then we'll try the best we can to manage the outcomes of that of this disconnection. Which is, it's still not what I hoped for. And the collaborations we proposed is, let's deal with it. And we know that the structure of the NLCOG board is such that if the board were to embrace what we've learned, that they could actually make decisions that could impact that disconnect and heal it.
Yeah. I mean, this conversation, we can be here for days in this conversation. Yeah. I just want to thank you for coming out and speaking with us about this, Kim. And John, thank you for everything you do, attending the meetings and everything, and just making sure that our voice is heard at these meetings.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for what you do for us, Roosevelt.
Absolutely.
I'm ready for another housing summit soon.
I mean, that's something down the pipeline. We have more conversations about housing that we're going to start doing, and I believe that that is the next that's the next summit that Allendale Strong is going to have to climb. this summit, we haven't gotten to the mountaintop yet. But at the same time, we have to make sure that our ultimate goal is the embedment of Allendale and the embedment of Shreveport as a whole. That's really, it's Allendale strong, but just like Dorothy says, the weakest neighborhood. I'm about to jack it up.
Well, strong is our weakest neighbor.
There you go.
We're only as strong as our weakest neighborhood, and
yeah,
that's where we are. I should open every chat with our friends at NLCOG with that. But of course, they think that just the weakest neighborhood needs a good highway through it, and then it'll suddenly become strong. Hadn't happened anywhere in Shreveport yet, but they continue to believe.
I know it hasn't happened anywhere in the world. So but yeah, thank you guys for coming out, and I just want to thank anybody that's watching this on YouTube or listening to this in their car in the podcast. Make sure you please subscribe and give us a like. And also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, make sure you like the podcast and keep listening to us, and make sure you go to AllendaleStrong.org. AllendaleStrong.org is where you can get a lot of the information that we're talking about and see a lot of the presentations that we're speaking about. So from everybody that at Allendale Strong and from everybody in Shreveport, thank you and have a great day.
Bye, y'all.